Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I am Konrad Stump with the Springfield-Greene County Library in Springfield, Missouri. I just want to thank you for joining us for this event this evening. So Nadia Bulkin's short fiction has appeared in many different anthologies such as Eggman's Heirs, She Walks in Darkness, and the recently released Black Crane's Tales of Unquiet Women. Her stories have been in the year's best weird fiction, the best horror of the year, and the year's best dark fantasy and horror. And her first collection of stories, She Said Destroyed, was a 2020 Summer Scares selection. So please join me in welcoming Nadia Bulkin.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, so I want to start right from the beginning, basically, and your first introductions to the horror genre. So I'm curious just sort of what media, whether it be books, movies, art, plays, that were kind of spooky or macabre that really struck you as a child.
So, great question. I
Thanks.
grew up in Indonesia, which
Mhm.
is like very into horror. It is part of the DNA of Indonesian culture, Javanese culture, which I grew up in. So, for instance, I always tell people my Saturday morning cartoons were literally horror movies imported from China. That's what they played at 8 a.m. on the television channels. So I always watched them and they scared me to death. And then my mother would be like very frustrated with me because then I couldn't get back to sleep at night. She'd be like, "Why are you watching that stuff? It scares you." And I was like, "But it's fun." So I've always been like very intrigued by things that frighten me. And from a young age, I was like making up stories about oh, the kids that went to like the soccer field over there are now ghosts because they died there, and like scaring my classmates and myself. So yeah, I think it's a very sort of oral storytelling tradition. So for instance, I would like sit with my like little horror book, and one of my parents' friends would be like, "I'll tell you a real scary story." There's nothing, way scarier than whatever you have in that book.
Uh-huh.
So that's like the tradition that I grew up in. And when I started writing fiction, I noticed what I always tell people is I couldn't keep ghosts out of my stories. They just kept popping up. And eventually I was like, maybe I should just lean into this because clearly it's something that comes naturally to me and like in how I think about the world. So yeah, and I haven't looked back since.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm curious, how did you start to sort of explore your love of horror beyond just sort of what you were seeing on TV? And you mentioned your mom. Did your parents support you having access to these things? And what kind of access did you have to the horror genre growing up there?
Um, not much in terms of, I mean, it was mostly television and movies. And these were not good movies, they were like very bad, very schlocky movies. Books were like, that the horror books were like in a whole other section of the bookstore. It was not something my parents partook in. They my mother actually saw a ghost when she was younger in Indonesia, and she is actually scared of horror because of that. So she actually doesn't engage in the genre at all. And my dad was like kind of a believer in some of this stuff, and so he would be like, never would have wanted to encourage that. So for me, it took me coming to the States. I started reading Goosebumps when like before I moved here, and from Goosebumps, I went straight to like Stephen King. So when I got here, incidentally, this is where libraries come in. I started hanging out at the horror section of the library, and that's sort of where I first started reading horror, like literally. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a sort of similar thing. Like my parents didn't like that I enjoyed horror, but they never actively deprived me of it.
Right.
I think
Yeah.
they liked that I was reading and that I was
Sure.
interested in something. And
Sure.
I grew up on Goosebumps. And then, I didn't go straight to King, which is what a lot of people do. I just went straight to Fear Street. And
Oh,
then
sure. Yeah.
then I went to college and I was like, I don't want to read. And I didn't read for years. And then, eventually I kind of got back into reading for pleasure. And same thing, like I don't ever remember really going to the library, but we always had access to books. I think if we wanted something, I grew up in the military. My dad was in the military, so we were always moving. So that might have been part of it. But my parents would get the books that we wanted. So it's not that we didn't have access to books, but I don't have any like amazing childhood memories of the library, sadly. Plenty of grown-up memories from the library, but yeah. So, and then I guess that sort of begs the question. I was thinking about this, like, what do you find frightening, and has that changed over the years?
Oh, great question. I mean, I would say it's definitely changed. I mean, when I was really little, all my nightmares were about velociraptors. So like, I don't have so many velociraptor related. I still do, actually. I still have like some of my scariest nightmares actually are still dinosaurs. So it's probably just because like I was, little when Jurassic Park came out, and it was really wanted to be a paleontologist and all this kind of stuff. But I mean, I think a constant has been, ghosts. As are sort of, they're my number one thing that I'm scared of. Obviously, sort of fears kind of become more complicated, I would say, as you grow up. I think when I was younger, there was much a stronger strain of losing my parents and being like abandoned, lost in the world. There was a lot of that kind of like, you're the only one left. No one will take care of you. When I was younger. And now it's, that in and of itself is not that scary, obviously, because you're an adult. And since I don't have kids, so I think that if I did, that would probably be like the replacement sort of fear. But I think for me, it's things like, like being utterly forgotten, like your life is meaningless, life has no meaning, like those kinds of things, like very sort of existential fears.
Yeah.
Pop up.
Well, that goes with having kids, because sometimes when I think about having kids, I'm like, oh yeah, they would like remember me and carry on my legacy. Whereas if I don't, then who's gonna know that I existed?
Right.
But yeah, I had these fears of like, yes, abandonment, being left and lost, and I would always have, like finding my mom in the parking lot kind of dreams. And then when I was older, I would also have like, I can't find my car. Where is my car?
Oh,
how am I going to get home? That kind of thing. And then I would have that moment where you're kind of lucid and you're like, wait a minute, this is a dream. If I just wake up, I'll be at home and my car will be outside. So that's kind of interesting. But yeah, I was thinking about it, and the thing that scares me now, besides mortality, is oh God, what scares me? I'm blanking on it. Nothing scares me anymore.
See,
just
don't
like,
ever say that, because that's when all scary things come.
That's right. That's right. All the like medical horror, like the human body is so creepy to me, and all the things that can happen to it, and just like, ugh. So I don't like anything that has to do with that.
Like sickness and contagion has become something I was not as scared of as a kid, but now I'm much more like, like
well, it's so weird how like it all changed, and you were sort of like, I don't want to touch people or be near people, and you're just kind of like, it's so interesting. And I mean, that kind of goes to people, because my next question was kind of about people indulging their horrors, and it being a thing that lets you explore the things that you're scared of. And I feel like there has been some definite pandemic horror that's come out of this, which to me is just like, no, I don't want that.
I mean, I've seen it both ways, like I know people who are like, I don't ever want to think about this again.
Yeah.
And there's some people who are like, I need to think about it to process. And I'm sympathetic to both sides. So
Yeah, I get that. So yeah, I'm curious then, sort of, if you, as a reader, if you kind of gravitate towards reading things that are about stuff that you're afraid of in real life, or if you just
hmm,
kind of stay away from it, because I don't want to read medical horror at all.
right. Yeah. Huh. I think that I do gravitate towards
Mhm.
things that scare me in real life. Yes.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that that's something that's always been a little bit unusual about me, is that I go to like the worst possible um, things that I am worried about, and I just lean into it. Like my favorite example of this is I was in Australia and I was on the eve of flying back to the US, and I decided that what I really needed to do was watch a lot of documentaries about plane crashes, because I was scared of plane crashes. And I was like, I'm just going to learn as much as I can, So I watched like a movie about a plane crash. And because, and what I sort of, I'm one of those processing people. So like for me, it's okay. The more I understand it,
Mhm.
the more I expose myself to it, the less horrifying it is.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I tend to do. There's also sort of a sense of like, if other people are writing about this, I don't feel as alone in my fear and in my anxiety about the thing. So yeah, I tend to sort of go towards things that are like, oh, I would be scared of that.
Yeah. Well, and I have always thought of horror as being sort of a safe space for people to explore the things that scare them. So I'm kind of curious just about, like, your thoughts on why people are attracted to the horror genre, um, or let's say why more people should be attracted to it.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. So why they're attracted to it. I think it's a lot of it is the same reason that people ride roller coasters. I think it is the adrenaline rush of being scared is fun for a lot of people. Not everyone, but a lot of people find it fun, especially because they know they're not actually in mortal danger. So it's like you get the high, but you don't get the splat on the ground. So I think that's most of it. At least it is for me. I know that a lot of people do use it as sort of like a almost like trauma exposure therapy sort of thing. And other people use it as escapism. You can do either way. As far as like why people should be more into horror, I think what's most interesting about horror is that it's the most transgressive genre, and the one that like really rewards things being turned upside down, narratives being like standard narratives being challenged. And I think there's just so much potential for reinvention and growth in that I think it's just a lot of fun, you know? So, one of my favorite sort of pastimes is like, I have a lot of friends who don't like horror movies, for instance, like, and they'll say, well, they scare me. I don't like to be scared. Or sometimes it's like, they'll name a horror movie, and it's like, I don't like to watch that kind of thing. But usually I can find something that a horror movie that they do like, even if it is scary, because it's something that speaks to them in some way, some sort of like transgressive, twisted way.
Mhm.
And, I'm quite proud of that sort of ability. Like, I feel like there's a lot of potential in horror that people dismiss
Mhm.
because the sort of reputation on its face is so of a certain sort of one note thing.
Yes. Yeah.
And I know that that was true for me when I was just starting to write horror too. Like I couldn't imagine writing it because I was like, well, I'm not Stephen King. And, all the sort of like online horror magazines that I was finding were like, so, red text on black,
Mhm.
screens. And
Yes.
I was just like, okay, I'm not going to write that. And it's actually so much broader and bigger of a genre than it at first appears to be.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like a lot of people associate horror with gore, and they're very kind of different things in my book. And I don't really like, obviously, if I'm not interested in medical horror, I don't really like gore that much.
Right.
But yeah,
Right.
I agree. Like it can horror allows the viewer to experience something that's sort of been twisted so that they can view something that would be too hard to kind of approach
Mm-hmm.
directly, sort of
Mm-hmm.
at this interesting angle. So I think,
Yeah.
yeah, the sort of like political, social commentary that can be, infused into it and explored
Mm-hmm.
through it, I do think that's kind of its best quality, and that, you know, maybe other genres don't lend themselves as much to. Um, but I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe romance does.
Definitely can get it wherever. I think what's special about horror is the fact that some of the horror is in like the hero doesn't make it out alive, you know. Whereas I think in other genres there may be a little bit of sort of expectation of what's going to happen, and in horror it's much easier to have an ending that is, ambiguous, that is um, sort of like bad or sad, in a way that like you can really use to your storytelling benefit.
Yeah, yeah, I love ambiguity, and I almost prefer a story that, doesn't wrap everything up, because I think probably as a writer and as a reader or viewer, you want to be affected by it afterwards. And so if it's sort of ambiguous, but in a way that isn't sloppy, then
Yes, sure.
you have like, yeah, it sticks with you better than if it's wrapped up. Well, that sort of leads a little bit to my next question with ambiguity. So a lot of your stories have appeared in, different anthologies, and you had a story, 7 Minutes in Heaven, that appeared in Aikman's Heirs. And so
Hmm.
I'm curious about, your kind of readership of Robert Aikman, if you had read him before, and sort of how you worked to make that story Aikman-esque.
Mm. I mean, I don't know how successful I was in
Yeah.
that, so I'm probably not the best judge of that. But I had not read him before. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
One of the things that I love about, sort of these anthologies that are very themed is that I feel like I get the chance to like expand my own horizons. But I really, really enjoyed what I did read. There were stories that like my favorite story of his is actually The Same Dog, and
Oh, yeah.
yeah, it's just something about it. Just like I can feel the visceral feeling of dread that
Mhm.
I had when in the climax of that story. Like I
Mhm.
can still feel it, and it's
Yeah.
many years later. Um, I think that I sort of tried to think of the emotions that it
Mhm.
made me that his stories made me feel, and sort of the sense of like, I guess, the ambiguity, like you were
Mhm.
saying, like the
Yeah.
sort of like unresolution, like very meaningfully unresolved stuff.
Yeah.
And I try to kind of, sort of like force myself to not explain things.
Mhm.
And I think that's what I tried to do in that story was like there were sort of the themes of kind of place heritage that I felt like kind of emerged in his stuff. Um, but also just like this sort of weirdness that just is, and
Mhm.
you have to like you live with it.
Yeah.
There's no explanation of it.
Yeah, I was interested, you hadn't read him before, and so something that I was thinking about that I like about being a reader as an adult, I feel like as kids, we sort of have, um, limited access because we don't know what's available to us as much, and, like, that's something that I love about being a reader now, with, some disposable income is
Right.
is that, I just am always finding, not even new people, let's say, older people like Robert Aikman that I wasn't familiar with, that I get to read. And that's almost sort of the most exciting thing, is the sense of discovery about reading. And so I am on a Charles L. Grant kick, who was a anthologist and wrote a bunch of novels set in a town called Oxrun. And so I'm like, oh, I'm trying to get all these books because I'm really interested in reading them in order.
Yeah.
And so anyway, it's exciting about about being
Yeah,
a
no, it
reader
is.
as an adult. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the collection, right? So all of the stories, except for the last one, had previously appeared elsewhere. So I'm kind of curious about the process of putting the collection together and sort of how you chose what stories went into it.
Yeah. So I kind of waited until I felt like I knew what I wanted my first collection to like be about. Um, because when I was younger, especially, I was just kind of submitting to everything, and in various styles. And it sort of took some time to think like, okay, this is what I write. And so I wanted to get to that point. And I centered it on like sort of social political themes with some sort of feminist theme kind of running throughout. And so there were some stories that, didn't make it in because they didn't fit. And, and honestly, I think that's okay because I think those are the stories that like represented me the least. So it's fine. And I sequenced them. I tried to sort of like, kind of like sequencing an album, probably like just sort
Yeah.
of trying to like open strong, close strong, like have some like bangers in the middle, and sort of like try to lead from one to another. I'm a very sort of I love pattern making.
Hmm.
So I really love that kind of thing. That was like the best part of it for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would be exciting. And it would be like putting together an album and you're just like, oh, yeah. I mean, I think
This leads so well into this.
yes, yeah, right. It's like not only are the stories crafted themselves, but like the story collection as an entity is crafted in a certain way. And I think that's exciting. So,
Totally. Yeah, that was really fun.
yeah. So, like I kind of mentioned in the introduction, She Said Destroy was chosen as a 2020 Summer Scares selection, and so I'm interested in how you became involved with the initiative and sort of why you think it's an important initiative.
I mean, I think it was just chosen.
Yeah.
uh, so I'm not sure that there's anything I did necessarily to get involved with it. But I do think it's a really important initiative. Anything that supports libraries in my book is super great. And anything that sort of widens horizons of people in libraries who, basically it's like, I want people who go into libraries to see horror and see a wide range of what horror could be. My small town library in Nebraska was mainly King, that's what I read and that's fine, but like there's so much more.
Hmm.
And so, anything that sort of broadens that horizon, I think is great. And,
Yeah.
like I said, like I didn't have much in the way of public libraries when I was really little because Indonesia didn't really have them at that point. But I had like the library at school. I read like every book in it, very Matilda style,
Oh
and
my
then
gosh. Yeah.
yeah, when I went to Nebraska, it was like my favorite place to be, and then as, going on as like a student, I made like very aggressive use of libraries and the, sort of like intercollege library loan system.
Oh yeah.
Like I just love books. I love having books around me. I would sit there surrounded by all the library books that I had checked out from like all of the libraries in the Northeast region, like just towering around me as I did research. And it's just like, I think it made me feel very secure in some weird
Mhm.
way. Like maybe just because they're, sitting there like bricks, or maybe just
Mhm.
something about like you feel human interacting with books, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
When
yeah,
I
and
think
libraries
the
let you do that like crazy.
yes. Oh, yeah. I mean, they're all about access, which is great, and all about connecting readers with stories that are, one, different from their own story, and two,
Mhm.
stories that they're interested in reading. And yeah, I mean, libraries are just great places. I wanted to say Matilda is one of my favorite
Oh,
non-horror childhood reads. I love
yeah,
Matilda. And yeah, so that kind of made me think,
a lot of horror in his stuff too.
yeah, I know. Well, and I haven't read, like Tales of the Unexpected. So that's another thing that I'm like, I need to do that sometime because I know that he
Yeah,
did it. But yeah, I also want to say I use Interlibrary Loans so much because I'm interested in, these older novels or these
right,
older
yeah.
collections, and they're just not, going to be in the library because libraries
Nope.
are also like, there's a cycle and things go away. Unless it's an academic library, they tend to keep things longer. But yeah, so I'm
Then you
I'm
have to be at the
curious.
right academic library though, you know?
That's right. They have to, yes. It's yeah. So I'm curious right now, as as an adult, like what is your relationship with libraries today, and how do you use them, whether they're as a reader for research, as an author doing an event?
Mhm.
How do libraries play a role in your life today? I mean,
Yeah,
outside of living in the pandemic.
right, yeah, like I was gonna say, that's something that it's kind of been a little bit closed off.
Hmm.
I mean, nowadays, honestly, like, I tend to buy way more books, and it's partly because I think as a writer, there's, like, a little part of me that's like, you just buy like, support your friends and, like, buy the
Hmm.
book, you know what I mean? Um, but and I'm very bad with, like, being a slow reader. So, as a reader, not necessarily as much, as when I was younger. But I love doing events at libraries. I think that they're sort of, one of our sort of last remaining town squares,
Hmm.
um, which is quite a lovely thought and heritage.
Yeah.
So, and I
Yeah.
still like, I use libraries for like movies and stuff too.
Yes, yeah, and I mean, people sometimes think that it's just books, but,
Yeah.
they have so much more, and they have, besides just physical materials, they have so many resources. But yeah, there is a town square, quality to them, and they're like these designated community hubs that everyone
Mhm.
agrees are kinda great.
Yeah.
And, it's kinda like what I love about the library is that, we're not judging anyone for where they have been, right? Like
Yeah.
everyone who comes in is kind of equal to us, and we're just trying to connect them with what they need. So that's something
Yeah.
that I really love about libraries is just, we're here to help people.
Right.
Yeah, so and then I was gonna say, yeah, I also am a slow reader, and I really like um owning the books. So even though I've worked at a library for a decade, I still buy too many books.
Yeah, and then I mean, it's funny because, like, I buy the book and then I finally finish it, like, a year later kind of thing, and then if I don't wanna keep it, then I just donate it to the local library. So
That's right. Yeah. Well, it's so easy. You can check a book out from the library, which is great, and then you have to return it. But like if you're if you're interested in it and you buy it and you don't get around to reading it, it's still there on the shelf to say, "Oh yeah, I was interested in that book a year ago. Maybe I'll pick it up now."
right, right.
Where
Yeah, it's
like,
too
yeah.
much pressure for me to, like, have the do I'm like, "Ah," it's like, just I don't need the book giving me pressure, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So right, both of our friends probably think of us as people who just love horror. So I'm kind of curious, as a reader, like what's something that people might be surprised to learn that you are really into that is not horror?
Oh, I mean, so many things, honestly. I mean, yes, I love horror, but I really do love a lot of things. Let's see, I love sports. That's something that most people really don't expect from me. I love sort of stories about fraud, um, like financial fraud and that
Mhm.
kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, I'm also obviously like I'm a political science geek, and that finds its way into my horror.
Yeah.
So I don't think people will be surprised by that one as much, but um, yeah, otherwise, I think probably the sports thing is probably the most
Mhm.
surprising.
Yeah.
I've had people sort of be like, "Really?" And I'm like, "Yeah." grew up in Nebraska, so like,
Yeah, I could see that. I would find that surprising. Yeah,
right?
I don't have anything that's like super out there interesting. I mostly am just like, I love Victorian novels with heroines, and
Oh,
I will read them all day long. So, so that's kind of my other, like, it's silly to say, like, I love classics, but I
me too.
do love
Me too. I
classics.
love them too.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
my thing is always like, when everybody just starts like criticizing like the horrible books they have to read in English class. I'm like, I was the kid that loved all those books.
Yes,
Like,
yeah. Well, and like if
even
you
the
read it as
worst,
yeah, if you read it as
but I
an
love the
adult,
book.
you get a whole new appreciation
You
for
do.
it. And I mean, that's kind of another exciting thing as being a reader as an adult is you can kind of say like, I'm going to revisit these books that I was forced to read or like, you know, was
Yeah,
supposed to read but didn't.
assigned
There
to.
were a
Yeah,
lot of those. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And so that's kind of fun. And yeah, I have my AP reading list from high school and I'm like, I'm going to try to work through this list,
Really? Wow.
over like the next decade and a half. That's my plan. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a slow goal, but it's a goal.
I mean, so that happened to me with The Great Gatsby.
Mhm.
It was assigned to me I read it when I was like sophomore in high school, I think. And I was like, this is dumb. And everybody around me said it was dumb. So I also kind of like believed it was dumb. And then I took a class, like a writing class, with an author who was like, read this as a writer.
Mhm.
And it gave me a whole other perspective on what he was doing with language and
Yeah.
description of people. And one of the things the teacher said was like, see how quickly you have an image of these people with one sentence. You know exactly who they
Mhm.
are. And I was like, whoa, true. And I mean, ever since then, I'm like, I love The Great Gatsby. But
Yeah, yeah.
and I think, for you when you're talking about like reading, like rereading as an adult, for me it's like rereading as an adult and a writer,
Mhm.
and seeing things. It's a whole other way of reading, and
Yeah.
you really sort of, it's like looking under the hood a little bit, you know. It's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, there were so many I always did this thing in college where I would take like a full 20 hours and then I'd be like, "Oh, this is too much." And so I would drop a class and take a
Oh,
normal like 16 hours, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah.
But I started this class that I dropped and the first day we like went into extreme detail of the first page of Mansfield Park by Jane Austen and it was just like,
Yeah, yeah,
oh, like there's
yeah,
way more to this book
yeah.
than I can even really wrap my head around. So that's what I always think about when I think about revisiting these books
Hmm.
as, a person in my mid 30s. Like I want that appreciation for, what's great about it that you don't appreciate when you're, 20 years old.
Sure. Yeah,
So yeah,
exactly.
yeah. So we'll wrap up with a couple questions. So the first one, of course, is, what are you working on now?
Oh, great. Yeah. I'm like, what am I working on now?
Yeah.
Um, ah, so I'm working on a novel right now. It is about a self-help cult and people who are running away from the cult but have secrets of their own. Dot, dot, dot. And also sort of short stories because I just can't seem to quit them. But yeah, that's the main thing I'm working on now.
Yeah, I love short stories, and I read somewhere that you like Francine Prose.
I do.
Yeah,
I
I
do.
really like Francine Prose. She came to my. I was
I
a
haven't read
creative.
her short stories though.
Oh, you should read The
Okay.
Peaceable Kingdom.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah. I majored in creative writing in in college, even though I don't write in the way that I thought I would now. But yeah, we read The Peaceful Kingdom, and she came and she read the last story in it, and it was so good. So
That's
I've
amazing.
always really liked Francine Prose, and I love her novel Golden Grove. So I also recommend that. But
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, the only thing I've read is Lovers at the Chameleon Club.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it was like, that was one of my like boom, like changed my whole view of like what you could do with a novel, which is my
Yeah.
favorite sort of revelation.
Yeah, that's great. And then, so where can viewers find out more about you or follow you on social media?
So I'm mainly on Twitter. I'm my name at Nadia Bulkin. Very easy, very unique. I also have a website, nadiabulkin.wordpress.com, and that's the main places where you can find me. I mean, Facebook I never check anymore because
Yeah. Yeah, I
so
mean, that's fair. I appreciate that. Yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It was lovely chatting with you. And,
thank you so much for having me on. This was
yeah,
great.
yeah, have a great night.